For a child born today, the very first word that she speaks will probably be in a different language than the last word she hears and understands. During her lifetime, her generation will experience unprecedented levels of acculturation. As a result of global warming and associated environmental, economic, and political catastrophes, by 2050, more than 1 billion people will be subject to climate mobility. Already, forced migration is one of the most significant challenges facing the world. On average, every 2 seconds, another individual is set upon the road. That means that by the end of my speech today, another 300 people will be seeking a new place to call home, a new community to belong to, a new means of gaining sustenance. Over the next 25 years, as a direct result of climate change, this will accelerate as the proportion of people experiencing forced migration grows, from 1 in every 110 persons to 1 in every 9. So what does this mean for cultures and cultural difference? Are our current attitudes towards cultures and cultural change going to be fit for purpose in a world beset by continual migration and the continuous intermingling of very different peoples? Amidst scarcer and scarcer resources, will our current cultural attitudes sustain humanist values and democratic ideals of inclusion, equality, and diversity? Or will we fall deeper into segregationist mindsets, totalitarian hierarchies, and practices of exclusion and conformity? If we are to sustain democracy into this challenging future, how might we need to transform the ways that children and young people learn about culture, participate in culture, and actively collaborate on cultural innovation? Kia ora koutou. My name is Nicholas Rowe. I'm a professor in dance studies at the University of Auckland, a UNESCO chair in dance and social inclusion, and the scientific lead of the Horizon Europe-funded project INTRACOMP, which is investigating currently the role of arts and democracy in an era of mass forced migration. I'm very honoured to be here and to be joining the Royal Society Te Aparangi as a fellow. My research focuses on the possibilities of the imagination. But just over 30 years ago, the first time I was on stage here in Wellington, I could not have imagined myself in this situation. I was performing in the Royal New Zealand Ballet's production of Petrushka on the old raked stage of the Wellington's Opera House. Now, these questions about inclusion, equality, and diversity were rattling around in my brain then, though, as I pirouetted down the stage. Not long before this, I had experienced an epiphany in the middle of a production of Giselle with the Finnish National Ballet in Helsinki. I was skipping across the stage as a happy peasant, dancing with my happy peasant on-stage wife, and she was smiling at me, and we were both smiling at the visiting nobility in appreciation of their presence in our happy peasant village. And we were all smiling out of the audience, and they were all smiling back. And I suddenly thought, what am I doing with my life? This is ridiculous. This is just 19th century political pornography. We're all trying so hard to look the same, to be the same, and to idealize this sameness. Yet generally off stage, we can't stand each other. I thought, what am I promoting? I felt smeared in this sameness and just wanted to get away. So soon after that, I found myself moving out of a career as a classical ballet dancer and choreographer, transitioning through a career as a contemporary dancer, and into a world that I found far more rewarding, participatory arts. I knew that I wanted to continue being imaginative and being physically imaginative through my body and other bodies. But I also knew it had to be in a way that enabled this longing I had for inclusion, equality, and diversity. I hungered for dance and democracy. As a facilitator of participatory arts activities, I loved the experience of fostering collaboration. I was particularly drawn into explorations of how this creative, participatory activity could enable liminal democracy, an embodied experience of being engaged with others in the world in an ethical reimagining of our roles and our relationships. I was particularly fascinated by how this experience of liminal democracy could take place in locations of political failure, in places that global, regional, national, and local governance systems had failed to ensure basic human rights. In such places, how could our shared imaginations provide pathways for temporary emancipation? How could collaborating together remind us that we are all, collectively, always in a state of becoming? This led me on an extraordinary odyssey, working with local arts organizations and cultural organizations and schools in economically and politically marginalized communities in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific. Amongst these experiences, I lived in the occupied Palestinian territories for 8 years, working with local artists, cultural organizations, and schools on participatory arts projects within the cities, villages, and refugee camps of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and South Lebanon. It was during these years that I began to document and research localized community arts practices. I wanted to more deeply understand how people living in these circumstances had developed highly sophisticated ways of enabling this temporary experience of liberation through collectivized imagining. I wanted to know how this creative, collaborative process sustained their sense of belonging and collective purpose. In the West Bank and Gaza Strip, in the face of the most brutal, long-standing processes of ethnic cleansing and apartheid that so-called democratic Western governments have ever enabled or helped to enable against the non-Western people. How do people wake up each morning with the hope and resolution to imagine another world? How does participation in arts activities enable this experience of sumud, or steadfast resistance to the expectation that they should be excluded, marginalized, and conformed to a comforting snapshot of vanquished victims or ferocious fundamentalists? What lessons will we need from there, and what concepts and practices can we develop further as we all slip deeper and deeper into a world defined by political failure? After unexpectedly stumbling into academia, I have loved working in the University of Auckland and exploring how research and innovation can bring greater visibility to these sites of creativity within failed governance. Now I'm leading the transdisciplinary Horizon Europe project INTRACOMP, which seeks to learn from these spaces of liminal democracy. As a consortium of 13 universities and cultural organizations from across Europe and the Pacific, we have been provided 3 years and €3 million to come up with policy directions for a world facing massive changes. As a scholar in dance and as a physical explorer of our imaginations, I'm very honored that the Royal Society Te Aparangi is also valuing this approach to knowledge. As we all know, at this time, there is an urgent need to convince the New Zealand government that social sciences, humanities, and creative arts are not just window dressing. That research led by scholars in social sciences, humanities, and creative arts can reveal critical, future-focused, policy-informing knowledge that simply cannot be accessed through STEM and economic innovation. So thank you for inviting me to join you. Finally, I would like to thank my wonderful family and my amazing partner, Mei Sun, the greatest enabler of imagination that I've ever known. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thanks, Nicholas. Questions for Nicholas? Where do you start?
Anything. Yes, Stuart.
Nicholas, I think the answer to the question is obvious, but why is Europe interested in what you're proposing?
Europe's fascinating at this moment. I've been back a few times in developing this Horizon Europe project, and you have this suddenly realization of how monocultural, how entrenched cultural hierarchies remain within Europe in ways that I think we've been able to dissemble, not perfectly, but to a much greater degree here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so they're recognizing that it's going to be unsustainable to live in a world in which certain cultural understandings are privileged above others, that are become more entitled, and that are used to exclude others. These rifts that are already happening in Europe, I think Europe is strongly concerned about the decline in democracy and democratic attitudes, and this is central to that sense of marginalization. So they're looking at lots of different ways of saying, well, where does knowledge exist that can help us shift some of these expectations?
Thank you very much. I don't. Oh, on for the recording. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. That was wonderful. One of the way cultures express themselves and identify themselves as cultures is through dance. So different dance styles in different places. Yeah. When you're thinking about migration and you're thinking about, and it's not just dance, all types of creative arts, helping people adapt and merge and make that not a painful, divisive process. How do you imagine that cross-cultural connection that says, you dance like me, therefore you're one of me, versus you don't dance like me, and therefore I should learn from you? Yeah,
it's a really good question. One of the philosophical precepts that we're moving into within the INTRACOMP project, and hence it's part of the title, is a concept called transculturalism, which is extending beyond interculturalism and those expectations of them and us, or that's built on cultural relativity and the expectation the other is always there, into a space of how do I generate new cultural ideals that are relevant, temporary, for the cultural context I'm in right now. And it's that transcultural competence we recognize that 5-year-olds and everyone's going to need as they grow up, so that they're flexibly able to move into it. Unfortunately, we do see national policies and governmental sort of approaches to culture and the arts around all over the globe that are heavily emphasizing much more of a nationalist rhetoric and appropriation of culture that will actually just lead to a far greater perpetuation of conflict once we do find ourselves sharing these spaces because of of climate mobility. So I think we have to rethink our conception of what we actually do with dance, and that it's not a fixed entity that says this is my dance, this is your dance, but it's just what's the dance we can create together that's meaningful for both of us in this moment, that draws on our lineages, but also recognizes the transience and the value of that transience in this moment.
I'll be really fast. Kia ora, Nicholas.
Sure,
you mentioned the privileging of certain forms of knowledge over others. Do you think here in Aotearoa there's a certain, let's say, privileging, say, of ballet over kapahaka?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think it's very obvious that we have deep cultural hierarchies existing here, an expectation that classical music or Shakespeare will somehow always be the superior phenomenon. And that's what we have to disassemble, because there's no rational basis for it. It's economic, it's political, it's helped sustain expectations. But there are narratives and movements and forms that there is no inherent superior art form. But you will find within a lot of academic writings, even going straight to the late 20th century, that will continue to argue for, classical European culture as being the apogee of all human existence. And that we have to take apart.